Welcome to the Sage Family Podcast, where we explore natural homeschooling, gentle parenting,
simple living, and family adventure.
I'm Rachel Rainbolt, the Sage Family Mentor, coming to you from an island in the Pacific Northwest, where I live wild and free in connection with my hilarious husband and 3 growing sailors in our fixer-upper on the beach. So join us around the campfire and let's get living the family life of our dreams. This is episode 90, and today I'm here with Tosha Shore talking about aggression. Tosha is a parent coach and the founder of Parenting Boys Peacefully, where she is on a mission to create a more peaceful world, one sweet boy at a time. She is also co-author of Listen, 5 Simple Tools to Meet Your Everyday Parenting Challenges, which has been translated into 5 languages. Tosha works with parents to care for themselves, connect with their boys deeply, set limits lovingly, and play wildly. Hey, welcome to the show, Tosha. Will you introduce yourself and share a bit about who you are and what you're passionate about?
Absolutely. My name is Tosha Shore, and I run a business called Parenting Boys Peacefully with the mission of creating a more peaceful world, one sweet boy at a time. And that's what I'm passionate about, creating a more peaceful world, one sweet boy at a time. And I do that by helping parents of young boys, youngish boys. Some of them are older, but I help, parents of young boys to take good care of themselves, to connect deeply with their sweet boys, to learn how to set loving limits unapologetically, and to really use play strategically. So we do a lot, but that's my passion, is like, if we change how we respond to boys in our family, it creates ripples out into the bigger world. And that's sort of my path to peace.
Yes. Okay. So you talked about how your business sort of focuses around boys. Why boys? Everything we're going to discuss on aggression applies to all genders, and you've identified some challenges specific to boys in our society, sort of as a social construct. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. So I focus on boys not because I'm looking at how they are biologically different from other genders. In fact, I work with parents of any child who identifies as a boy, because what I'm looking at is how we as a society treat boys, how we respond to them. And one of the things that's particularly challenging in terms of their being able to grow into emotionally intelligent men is that we often, as a society, right, the royal we, wherever you are in the world, are uncomfortable when our boys show feelings that we have labeled as feminine. So we need to really take this opportunity as parents of young boys to create safe spaces for them to show all of their feelings.
Gosh, I love the way you speak about that. And I agree with all of that and relate to so much of that. And I think it's a really important perspective to bring to a conversation on aggression. So thank you for all of that. Okay, what is the mainstream conceptualization of and response to aggression in kids, and why is it unhelpful?
I would say the mainstream, there is something wrong. Put the top back on the boiling pot, essentially, and we react, we don't respond, and so we tend to punish, we tend to isolate, we tend to shame. Why is that not good? That is a problem, because the young children who struggle with aggression is a struggle. Like, we're just seeing the symptoms, we're seeing the chi, right? But we're not seeing the roots and what's causing that. And we need to dig a little bit deeper and not spend a ton of time on the why, because most of the time, why isn't that obvious, honestly. It's like, most people probably who are listening to this podcast, like, we're very aware parents, we're involved, like, if a child's being bullied at school, we're aware and we're on it. And so a lot of parents who come to me are just like, this kid's like life. Like, I don't know what's wrong. Why is he, kicking me when I ask him to get off the iPad or whatever? So, it's problematic because they need exam in order. That's why it's a problem. We're actually, and the other thing I'll say about that, they feel like they're bad. They want to do well. And then when they're not able to, they feel horrible. and they feel like they're bad. This is another sort of thing that happens when we start shaming, blaming, isolating, sending on timeouts, and we start treating them that way. You think about a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old who is in preschool, and I don't know, something happens, they don't get the place in line, or they don't get to the table that they wanted to go to, or be at the station that they wanted to go to first, and they have a big, huge reaction, and it scares the adults. That child is like, they themselves are scared. The fear is driving the aggression. And then when they see an adult, or the adults in the situation who can't deal with that, they're, whoa, I'm scared. Then the child's like, oh my God, I'm scared, and they also don't know how to deal with me. They can't handle it. Something really must be wrong. And we see the behavior spiral down. So these kids are getting kicked out of preschool, kicked out of school. It's just the exact opposite of what they need.
Yeah. Yes. What is the purpose of aggressive play in children? And is there a level or expression of aggression that would warrant concern?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is probably a purpose to aggressive play. I don't know if I call it aggressive play. I would say, physical play, pushing the limits kind of a play. I think I know that our kids learn a ton through play, right? They lose play partners if they play too hard. They lose play partners if they don't play hard enough because the other party is bored. So essentially the benefits are the building of emotional intelligence and how we interact with one another and other human beings. How do we keep a partner, if you will? How do we make friends? How do we, balance our skills and theirs, right? If we just act like we're the best and we're the strongest, well, that's not going to go over that well. So maybe it makes sense to tamp that down a little bit and not always have to win, and let somebody else who's smaller maybe win sometimes. These are all things that we learn through play. But aggression is different. I mean, aggression is like, if you've got a little guy who's struggling with aggression, or a little child who's struggling with aggression, you're seeing it get in the way of their relationships, right? So it might be in the way of their relationships with siblings, with friends. This might show up as everyone in the family feeling like they need to tiptoe around that child's behavior, right? They're afraid, parents were afraid to say no because of the upsets that are going to happen. Siblings can fall into that trap as well. Even playmates can fall into that trap, but you could also see it as not being invited to parties, being excluded from social events. So aggression is a problem when it's affecting sort of the smoothness within which our family is running. And it's also affecting oftentimes that child's ability to live their biggest, best life, because their behavior is pushing people away rather than bringing people close.
Yes. Okay, that's well said. A lot of parents worry when there's aggression, even in play, but aggressive play can be normal and healthy. I have fond memories of my kids and their friends rolling down grassy hills and sandy beaches, tangled in wrestly play with their friends. And it always reminded me of the little lion cubs pouncing on each other. The key for me was consent. They had to invite the other child to join in the play, and the other child had to consent with a yes. And the second someone said stop, or whatever safe word they agreed on, the game paused to allow for an exit. So long as consent was honored, it was great, and they gained so much from that practice. What is happening within a child when they become aggressive?
My sense of what's happening and what I understand from the science is that a child who is aggressive is most often scared. And so what's going on is, we have our limbic system in our brain that's essentially scanning for safety. Am I safe? Is there a threat in the environment? And a lot of times, children who struggle with aggression are sensing threat. They're extra sensitive, and they are sensing threat in the environment where there is none. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes that's sort of the underlying what's going on in the brain. I mean, what sets that off could be a million and one different things, but essentially that's what's going on. And so that's why the response needs to be one of balancing the nervous system, lending our calm brain, right? Co-regulating, connecting, rather than everything we talked about at the beginning that pushes them away, isolates them, shames them, and makes them feel bad about themselves unintentionally, of course, on our part, but ends up making the situation worse and not better.
Yeah, we've recently done an episode on the polyvagal theory. So in those terms, it's like their neuroception, is triggering that sympathetic nervous system, and they need our co-regulation to get back to safety.
Exactly. Yeah. I just try to say it as simply as possible because I really want parents to know, you don't need to know what neuroception, you don't need to know these scientific terms at all. I find that if I just put out to parents, I like to say it like aggression is fear in disguise. That's sort of like a simple way to say it, because that allows us to conjure up our empathy. Whereas if we're feeling like the kid's bad or out to get us, we tend to react and not respond.
Yes. Okay, there is so much pathology and dysfunction that comes from people's avoidance of their emotions. And if we can learn to open up and make space for feelings when they show up and trust that they will move through us, then we can teach our children the same. I've heard you invite parents to release their fear of their children's aggression. And I'd love to explore that. Like, instead of worrying about what it means about us and our children when they're aggressive, we could accept that it is here in the present moment and kind of make space for it and keep everyone safe while it's here. So how does fear get in our way?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned at the beginning, we all come with our baggage, and fear does get in the way. And one of the things that our children most need when they're struggling with the aggression is our calm brain. And so one of the first things that we have to do is to figure out what I call, how do we get ourselves into good enough parenting shape to be able to show up more often in ways that we feel good about. And that includes being calm in the face of behavior that's often quite the opposite of calm. And so a lot of this work, this emotional healing and the release that you're talking about, happens outside the heat of the moment. This is our prep work, or this is like, we do this in tandem with helping our children in the heat of the moment. So whether or not you've read our book, Listen, I don't know, but there's a practice we call listening partnerships. And in it, essentially, you are exchanging an equal amount of time with another parent and sharing your feelings, not necessarily through talking, although that can happen too. But when you talked about release, it's like the fear comes out in all kinds of ways, right? It's not like there's a reason why we pee our pants, or kids pee their pants when they're scared, or our teeth chatter, or we shake uncontrollably, or we sweat. Those are all physiological, somatic responses to fear. And so often as parents, what we try to do is put the cap on it to try to, soothe our children so they don't feel it. And what happens is that we might be able to get our way, sort of by an hour or by 5 minutes, but ultimately we're not going to be able to help them heal. In order to heal, we have to create safe space for the feeling to come out. So our feelings also have to come out, and that's what a listening partnership is for. There are lots of ways to work in listening partnerships, but one thing that I find works really well when we're dealing with aggression is thinking about, one, whether or not the child reminds you of somebody. So, for example, so often when I'm working with parents, their child who struggles with aggression reminds them of their brother, their father, their mother, their neighbor, their cousin, like whatever it is. And what happens is when we don't make that connection and go back and sort of reclaim our power that we didn't have in that moment when we were young, and whatever hurt set in for us, if we don't do that, we just react. But if we do, then it's much easier when we get to that sort of moment of truth, when our child explodes at us, and we can remember, because we've done this sort of somatic release of the, anger towards the brother or the parents who didn't protect us from the sibling or whatever it was, that we then can separate our child from that person from our past. And then it's much easier to see their goodness. Another thing that I always tell parents is really useful is to try to remember that there's always that sweet child underneath the behaviors. I talk about like the behaviors and then, the sweet child and then the behaviors kind of glommed on top. And we oftentimes with aggression end up going for the behaviors, stop hitting him right now. And not that we don't need to stop that behavior. We do need to stop the behavior, but we need to do it from a place of love, from a tone of love. And by going for connection, the target's really connection. And then the behaviors kind of fall away. Yes. So we're kind of going at it the wrong way.
Yes. And it's hard to go for that connection if you're in so much fear around the behaviors. And the two,
it's impossible.
Yeah. And the two nervous systems then just react to each other over and over again in this spiral, because you're cueing like, this feeling is too big. It's scary. Y'all need to panic because it's shown up. And then they react in fear and, and more aggression to that. And they just sort of keep pinging.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm working on a children's book right now, and this is one of the themes that I'm trying to get through, right? The message that I'm trying to get through is this ping pong of how our nervous systems play off each other, parent, child, and how they affect one another. And how simple it is, for one to shift. And then once the one shifts, which is going to be the parent, newsflash, right? The kid's not going to be the one to do it, but we just do a little shift in the way that we show up, and then their behaviors shift.
Yes. Like the biggest action aside from containment, if it's necessary, is actually just that work we do on ourselves in those hard moments of staying grounded and signaling that safety through co-regulation. I've always liked the metaphor of being the lighthouse in your child's emotional storm, like be the state that you want to see in your child. And then the stronger that connection you have with your kid, the more effect you have on your kid. Like if they can trust that we love them unconditionally and we see them as inherently good and trying their best, then we get positioned as allies. And that makes a huge difference to their openness of our support.
Right. But one thing that I see happen so often is that we parents take everything personally. And once we do that, the train's left the station.
Yes,
so that's a big piece of work that we have to do, right? This is not our fault. We didn't do something horrible to create a monster. Yeah. We have to just sort of meet our child where they are, and help them move towards a better place, and let go of is this something that I did to create the problem?
Yeah. And even things that they will say, we're taking them personally as they're being spoken and sort of chasing after these auxiliary behaviors instead of just responding to the emotion that's shown up and the human inside the eye of that storm.
Absolutely. And then we end up talking too much, right? We just end up talking too much because they say they get mad. We say, time to wash your hands for dinner. And they say, no, I'm not washing my hands. And we completely, lose it. And we say, yes, you're washing your hands. And they're like, I hate you. You're the worst mom ever, stupid mom, or, whatever it is. And all of a sudden we're like, oh, did you call me stupid? Or whatever it is. And we've completely lost it. Right. Mm-hmm. We have taken it personally. We have lost our cool. We have lost our tone. We have lost perspective on the fact that there is a sweet child under there with these yucky behaviors, and we've got to connect with them. We've got to connect them. We can't get distracted by a word that they say. We need to be reading their behaviors and understanding what kind of help it means they're asking for.
Yes. In coaching, I ask parents often to send me a video of a hard moment. And so that I can, rather than, their understanding being, conveyed to me through the lens of their story and all of that, I can just get at that raw data. And almost always one of the things we talk about is too much talking. What signals is the child showing me that's telling me, or that's, communicating to me that there's too much talking? And what it usually looks like to me is that the child, every time the parent starts talking, the child will get more energized and agitated and looking away and using their voice or their bodies to sort of push like the voice away and the sound away. And then when they stop talking, like everything starts to, the temperature starts to drop, and then they start talking again and it gets turned back up.
Yeah. And I noticed that especially when parents start to try to name the emotions. This is something that like a lot of coaches and parent educators actually encourage people, parents to help their children name the emotions. And what I see over and over again with kids who are struggling with the aggression, and these are big behaviors, these are challenging behaviors, is that when we go in there, and even if we're kind and we say, I'm sorry that you're feeling angry, or I'm sorry that you're disappointed, or whatever it is, that's like pouring lighter fluid on the campfire. It's just like more of an explosion. So better to just listen, better to just understand, like, oh, these are just words. I tell people, just put on your spacesuit, pretend you're in one of those big, white spacesuits, nothing's going to hurt you, and kind of let it fly in that moment. Be a calm presence. Let their brain co-regulate with your calm presence.
Yes. It's like less doing and more being.
Yes, for sure.
Yes. How can we use playfulness to disarm tension?
Yeah. So play is interesting with aggression. I mean, I work with families who like their kids really are struggling with aggression, right? They're hitting, kicking, spitting, scratching, calling horrible names, throwing things, breaking things. That when they're in the heat of the moment, play tends to not work that well. Before the train leaves the station, like when I work with parents whose kids are really struggling with aggression, we're doing all sorts of prep work. And before that train leaves the station, when you can see that child ramping up, we can get playful and oftentimes kind of help them through by releasing the tension through laughter. Mm-hmm. Right. So let's just say a child doesn't want to brush their teeth and it's time to brush the teeth. And we know from history that this can go south really quickly, but it's kind of early on and they're not too tired and whatnot. And they say, no, I'm not brushing my teeth. And instead, if we can seize that first moment, like the kid's been just fine until now, and then all of a sudden that was the break, there weren't signs earlier, then we could come in silly and do what we call the vigorous snuggle, right? We could come in and do like, what happens to little boys who refuse to brush their teeth. And then we do something goofy, right? They get their eyelids licked, or they get their, whatever, their, cheeks, bubbled with or something, right? Just something goofy that really, really gets laughter going. But that's before the aggression starts. Like that might be when you get that first sign that things are going south. Once things have already gone south, play tends to work less well with aggression. I find that a lot of kids start to take it, they feel slighted or they feel like we're mocking them. And that's then not helpful. So play when we're dealing with a child with aggression is something that I want to help parents integrate into their family as just something that they do on a regular basis. And I don't mean Monopoly play, or Chutes and Ladders or whatever it is, but I'm talking about rough and tumble, physical play, pillow fights, holding a kid, spinning them around, flipping them upside down, things that, get us sweaty, chasing each other around the house, things that get us laughing, things that get us feeling close and connected to one another. So I would coach parents to integrate that type of play into your family, not when the aggression is happening, but just in general. Because also one of the things that happens when parents are dealing with aggression in the family is that there's just so much more stress and hardship. And like, it just feels like the whole thing, parenting, is just a drag. And the fun times are just like this occasional, little glimpse at what they want something to be, what they want family life to be. And so I'm wanting to shift that. I'm wanting to sort of up those sweet times and lessen the challenging times. And so integrating play outside of the heat of the moment, I think, can be a really, really good thing.
Yeah. Play can be such a great arena for equalizing if a child feels like a lot of life is out of their control, or like they don't, to recapture some of the power in the dynamic, like one of my kids' favorite things was like follow the leader. Like if the day was just feeling tense, I'd say, okay, let's go for a walk. And I would just follow their lead on everything to the point of ridiculousness, like, oh,
Right.
okay, we're walking backwards. Oh, I keep tripping. Oh gosh, I need way more practice with this. How are you so good at it? And, whatever, like the dynamics are going on, like just like an exercise of play, being playful, where where they have a lot of the power, they have a lot of the competence, where they are setting the tone, and they get to be the most competent and knowledgeable and skilled. And that just really sort of filled a lot of the tanks that needed to be filled. So then we could go into like the bedtime routine or whatever, feeling way more grounded.
Yeah. And what we're really going for in those situations is laughter. So there's the piece about sort of the shift in power, right? Our children generally, really all over the world are being controlled by big people all the time. We're telling them from the moment they get up to when they go to sleep, most of us, what they need to do and how they need to do it, and know they're doing it wrong, and this has to happen that way. And so the opportunity to be playful in the way where you're, in the example that you gave, where they get to lead and they're more competent and we're following their lead, it's great. And what we're going for is like, what makes them laugh? Like what's silly? And you're going to have to calibrate yourself, because like that might be super funny for a 4-year-old, but that's not very funny for a 10-year-old. Most 10-year-olds, some 10-year-olds, yes. And this is also something I say to parents, are like, what should a, X-year-old be doing? How should they be responding? And it's like, no, let's just look at how your child is responding, not like what the book says they're supposed to be doing. And then let's, like I said before, meet them where they are and help them. And so what brings laughter? Because that laughter, like I said earlier, is one of the ways that we release fears. That's why there's the expression nervous laughter. We do laugh when we're scared.
Yeah.
And the more we laugh, the less fear we feel.
Yeah. Even just reflecting on like, when was the last time you laughed together? What were you doing? Where were you? What was happening? What things were you saying? How were your bodies? Were they touching? Were they apart? Like that can be a great place to start if you're feeling so deep in the negativity that it's hard to access that. Even just when was the last time you laughed with your child?
Right. Or when was the last time you laughed at all with or without your child? Right. Because parenting is always about starting with us, always about caring well for ourselves. And if we are in a place where life feels really, really serious pretty much all the time, it's going to be super hard to help our kids relax. And so when's the last time that we laughed? When's the last time you laughed like with a good friend or with a partner or whatever? Like we also need to work on that in our lives, because we tend to take things very, very seriously. And even when life, throws curveballs, and boy does it, and things can be really hard, like there's always space to find laughter. And it is so healing. It is so healing when we're able to do it. So even just think about somebody who makes you laugh, somebody who brings fun into your life, and reach out. Like sometimes we need help from the outside, and it's hard for us to conjure that up for ourselves, but there's somebody that we know, oh, whenever I'm with that person, like we always laugh. Call them up.
Yes. Okay. Sometimes it's necessary to establish a limit to keep everyone safe when aggression shows up. And I know a lot of gentle parents especially can struggle with this. When are loving limits necessary, and what might they look like?
Yeah, so this is a great question. And I think limits is a place where gentle parents struggle. It's important. I feel like limits to me are the thing parents struggle with the most. And it's one of the most important pieces of the puzzle. Like until you feel confident and competent in your limit setting skills, it's going to be really hard to help your child through aggressive behaviors. When do we need to hold those limits? To me, it's a safety issue. Right. Generally, like most limits or boundaries in parenting are pretty gray, right? How much time do you want to give them on electronics? What time is bedtime? What kind of food's okay, not okay? All these things, like you might do one way, I might do another way. It's okay. Everyone's going to turn out just fine in the end. But limits need to be brought on aggression when there's safety issues, right? So
Yes.
if the child is hurting themselves, if the child is hurting you, the parent, or if the child is hurting somebody else, or if things are getting broken, all of those are signs that we need to come in and bring a loving limit.
Yeah, I completely agree. We have like these 3 agreements in our family that I talk about a lot with other families as well, that essentially it's do no harm to yourself, others, or the environment. And so how do I know if a boundary or containment or a loving limit is necessary if we're out of alignment in one of those 3 areas? Essentially, it's my job to keep everyone safe. And
that's right.
And while I let, probably 80% of mainstream boundaries go that are kind of arbitrary and I lean toward freedom, I am 100% all in on those boundaries that are essential, which is do no harm. And I have all the confidence in that. And that's super helpful for my kids. So when I work with parents who are struggling with this, feeling, unsure about it, once they really step into like confidence with it, the aggressive behavior tends to go down a lot. The kids sort of feel safe, like, oh, you're not afraid of my feelings. I can trust you. I can trust you to help me when I need your help. And that really enhances the connection, which, a lot of gentle parents are afraid that it'll damage it. I find that it just enhances it so much more. They trust us so much more.
Yeah, I think probably because of the way most of us were raised, we feel like limits are a punishment. Like that's just sort of the category that it falls into. We don't think of limits as a gentle parenting strategy. Which I do, and I want to say that loud and clear. Like setting loving limits is a gentle parenting strategy, even though it might be loud and physical, and you need to have your windows closed so the neighbors don't call the police or whatever it is. Like that's all real, but it is part of gentle parenting. Limits are not punishment. Our kids do need them to feel safe. The example that I said earlier when we talked about preschool teachers, for example, being unable to, feel confident in their ability to set limits, that's what leads to the fear that then the child picks up on and behaviors get worse and that kid gets kicked out of school, right? So we need to be able to move in close. And you asked, what does that look like? I mean, that can look like different things. It can look silly, like we talked about earlier, but it can also and often will look like physically moving in. And so a lot of parents will say, I told him to stop hitting her. He's hitting his little sister, for example. I told him to stop hitting her. And I say, well, to me, like that's not really a limit. It's more like a pipe dream, right? It's a wish. It's a prayer. You want him to be able to respond, but he's not able to. It's not that he's trying to make your life miserable. It's really like you have to have that mindset of he can't versus he won't. And then what we need to do is move in physically. And so if he's hitting his sister, for example, I want you to physically get down. We don't want to be hovering above, because hovering above is, a threat to any mammal, including us. We want to be down to their level. We want to check ourselves in terms of our tone if we're saying anything. And then we want to move in lovingly and just hold that limit. In other words, we want to make stop happen. If he's hitting her, then we don't just want to say, stop hitting her, but we want to put our body in between so he can't hit her. Might we have to hold his hand back? Yeah, we might have to. But if we are calm and we are feeling loving and we haven't lost sight of that sweet child underneath the behaviors, then that's just fine. We're not being harsh towards them. We're not hurting them in any way. We're not being, physically aggressive towards them, but we are holding them back from doing something that ultimately, if they are quote unquote successful with, is going to make them feel worse. It's going to damage the relationship with the sibling, and it's going to fuel the aggression. Right? Because they're more scared now that they've gotten away with something, that they actually did hurt somebody. That's terrifying to feel your power in that way. No child wants to hurt anybody else. So we really have to physically move in. And then the other thing that I really, there's so much to say about limits, but one thing I think I can't leave without saying is that it's important to realize that we do get to decide, what our rules are, right? There, do no harm, like you said, is your rule in the house. We get to decide that, but we can't control how our child or how our children feel about those limits when we bring them, as loving as we may be when we do it.
Yeah.
So don't expect, like one thing I come across all the time is parents who they bring a limit, like, okay, I got this, I'm getting down low, I'm using a calm voice, I'm getting in between them, and then their kid gets upset and they're like, and then he just went ballistic. It's like, yeah, he's not going to say, oh, thank you for reminding me. Like, I really don't want to be hurting my sister. I appreciate your intervention. That's not how it plays out. This is not how it plays out, folks. So expect that there will be upset. We can't control anybody else's emotions, including our child's. It is okay that they feel, that they have a feeling or feelings, in response to the limits that we set. And in fact, if we can listen lovingly, if we can be patient with them as they release that upset back to the release, that's in fact what allows the aggression to diminish in intensity and in frequency over time.
Yeah.
I haven't seen anything else work to reduce it. You might find another strategy that is more surface that gets you, buys you 5 minutes or buys you one night or whatever. But like, if you've got a pattern of aggression happening, if it hasn't gone away with what you're doing, then you got to try something else.
Yeah. Yes. So I'm hoping everyone out there can hear what we're saying. One thing I want to highlight is that you use that example of parents sort of making a request, like stop hitting your sister. And we have an episode on boundaries in which we talked a lot about the difference between a request and a boundary. And they're not the same thing, and they're often confused as being the same thing. And especially if a child is dysregulated and we're saying like too much talking, like they're not hearing that anyways. And if they could, they would, but they can't. So making sure that those limits are things that are within your control. So like you said, moving between the siblings if one is hitting the other. So we're not giving them the opportunity to do that harm. I think that's such an important distinction that a lot of gentle parents miss, where it's like, well, every time they hit, I'm right there, asking them not to, essentially. But if they could, then they wouldn't. They need us to be physically providing that containment to keep everyone safe.
Yeah. And I know that can feel overwhelming to parents, but I do want to say that there are ways, there are strategies to implement that will help, move your child through the aggression. This is not forever. Yeah. It's not forever. But if there is a pattern of aggression and it's not going away, it is something that you will have to invest some time in working on. It generally doesn't go away on its own. Yeah.
And I think, the sooner you sort of go all in and give this area the attention and the nurturing that it needs, the better that is, because they're only going to get bigger. And it gets even more triggering, and harder the bigger your child is.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I want to say that, if you're a parent of a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old and you're like, oh my God, I should have done this when they were 2, it's not too late. And I want to be clear that if you are a parent out there of an older child who's, 10 or 12 or whatever, it is not too late. It's like investing for retirement. Yeah, it would have been great if you started like my kid when he was 16. But if you haven't done it and you're already 50, better now than never, right? It's like, we don't just go like, oh, well, I didn't start when I was 16, so now just forget it. We start now. So it is never too late. It will look different, yes, but it's not too late. And also, you are the perfect person to help your child. There is nobody else who can do this work for you, nobody else who cares enough, nobody else who knows the ins and outs of your child in the way that you do. And I believe deeply in parents and our ability to help our kids.
Yeah. So oftentimes, what that loving limit looks like is it has to do with how and where you position your body. Is there ever a time when you put a door between your child and another person or an object or you.
Yeah, absolutely. You could do that because you're not able to keep yourself physically safe, right? I'd much rather have a child pounding on the door with you on the other side than, pummeling you if you're not able to keep yourself safe. Let's say they're an older child, for example. And also, what tends to happen is if we do get hurt, right? Let's say our child does scratch us or bite us or punch us or whatever happens. It's really hard to stay calm. Like oftentimes that is the breaking point for parents. So yes, being on the other side of the door so that doesn't happen, because if you can be on this other side of the door, even if you're, sitting down on the door and that child's sort of pummeling the door, let me in, I hate you, blah, 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 whatever it is, you're going to have a much easier time staying regulated yourself. If you can be breathing, if you can close your eyes for a moment, if you can think about a time when you loved that child deeply, you felt deep love for that child, even though you're feeling like you hate them in that moment, right? It's time for you to regulate when we're feeling threatened. And when we are threatened, not when we're feeling threatened, but we actually are physically threatened, it's really hard for our nervous system to stay regulated, and they need it. So yeah, absolutely. There are times where we're going to be on the other side of a door.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think another important thing I want to make sure we include in this conversation is that each child really receives support differently. And so I think it's really important to get sort of curious and observe and, trial and error and try things to get to know really what is received as helpful by your child, because it really can be so different from one kid to the next, right?
Yeah, you're talking about in terms of how to respond to the aggression.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But if the aggression is happening, like I don't want you all tiptoeing around it. That's the part that concerns me. It's like, if you're feeling like you're not addressing the aggression because you're scared, that's a problem. Then we have to start with what we talked about earlier, like working on our own fears so that we're in good enough parenting shape to help our kid through their fears. Because when we're both terrified, bad situation, we just spiral down.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, so I have one kid for whom if aggression showed up, I would position my body between, but also if I just sort of wrapped myself around him, he would kind of just melt into me and like instantly become regulated. And I have another child whom, if I touched them in any way, like that would make everything harder and bigger. And if I just used my body to create space for them, like the temperature would just drop down right away. And one kid for whom conversation, like they needed to be like listened to, and they wanted to be like reflectively listened to. So like that was what really helped them to get back to where they needed to be. So I just found that super helpful. When I was, I feel like each human needs like a season of working through this, and sort of exploring this and figuring it out and building skills around it and sort of fine tuning your connection around it. And so with each kid, getting to know really what they received as helpful made a big difference. And to them too, like they still carry that with them today, even though my kids are older, like when they become dysregulated, sort of using those things that they know are helpful.
Absolutely. Every child is unique. There's no sort of one size fits all. But there are some basic strategies that pretty much work across the board for sure.
Yeah. Okay, the show notes can be found at sagefamily.com/podcast90, where you can also subscribe and get future show notes sent right to your inbox. So what, Tosha, are your favorite resources for people to dive deeper into this topic?
Well, I would have to put out our book, Listen, 5 Simple Tools to Meet Your Everyday Parenting Strategies. We have a section in there on aggression. I think, do we have a section on aggression? Yeah, I think so. But definitely limit settings. I forget how we organized it now. There's definitely a section on like fear. I forget how we ended up doing it in the end. It was already like 5 years ago, but there are definitely lots. It's definitely there in the index, and there are lots of really concrete anecdotes about how parents all over the world have used really specific strategies to help their kids through super challenging behaviors. So that would be one thing. And then this is really what I do. I run a course twice a year called Out with Aggression. And I don't know when this podcast is going to go live, but I generally run it in fall and spring. So I can, let you know how to guide people towards that if that is of use to you. I will just say that is a course for parents whose children do identify as boys, although I definitely have people who sneak in, who have a girl who's struggling with aggression, and that's fine if you're okay with the language that we use and all of that. So yes. those are the two main things that I would say. And then I would also just say it is important, whatever you do, to start with yourself. So if you're listening to this and you're going like, there's no way I can stay calm in the face of aggression, go to whatever your go-to thing is for calm. So, and your own healing, whether that be therapy, whether that be a somatic experience of some sort, whether that be journaling, it doesn't matter. There's no one right way, but you can get started now.
Yeah, completely agree. And then you have a Reconnect resource too. Can you tell us about that? I want to make sure we link to that too in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. On my website is parentingboyspeacefully.com/reconnect. You can go and I offer, it's a 10-day program that I just sent you an email. I send you an email with a video each day, and it gives you just a really, really simple thing to try. So one of the things that we didn't talk a ton about is connection. We talked a little bit about it, but it's a step oftentimes that we skip when we're wanting to address the aggression. We want to go straight to the limit setting and stopping things. Tends to not work that well when we jump ahead. So if you are struggling with the aggression, the Reconnect would be a great thing to start with because it moves you day by day into a practice of reconnecting with your child.
So like proactively enhancing that connection outside of the moments, and then you can sort of call back to that when things are in those hard moments.
Yeah, it's not even really calling back to that. It's more like you talked about filling their backpack, like filling their cup. Filling their cup, their emotional cup of love, if you will. So it's strategies for that, among other things. And it's really 15 minutes a day max for 10 days, including like reading it and doing whatever it is I'm asking you to do. It's super short. Anybody can do it, even if you have 8 kids.
Thank you so much. This was great. I've had so many parents asking for this, like in the podcast, like, yes, all this is great, but what if my kid is really aggressive? Like it feels like that's this outlier experience for a lot of people, and they're not sure how to apply all these gentle parenting, approaches to it. So,
well, have a great day.
You too.
We'll be in touch.
Bye, Tosha.
Bye, Rachel. Bye.